Difficult and traumatic events often have a way of burning themselves into our memories, into our heads. A lot of times you'll hear people asking, do you remember where you were when 9/11 happened? And a lot of us have specific memories of where we were, what we were doing at that moment. Some of us who are a little bit older, we ask the same question about the Challenger disaster, those sorts of things. The same can be true of losing a loved one. The situation might not be as sudden or traumatic, but there's moments when we go through losing a loved one that get burned into our memories. And they can be hard to get past sometimes. Touch is a powerful way of communicating. Think of all the things that meaningful touch can do. Think about what a hug communicates. A kiss. A pat on the back even. A handshake or a hand on the shoulder. Touch communicates a lot to us and can be healing and meaningful. Touch can also connect us. Can connect us to each other. Touch can connect us to significant memories as well. Many years ago, I lost a good friend of mine, my best friend, Ken, to cancer. And we walked the whole journey with them through his diagnosis and treatments and all those sorts of things, and walked with them hoping that there would be healing, whether it's through God or through medicine. And that just was not to be, and Ken passed away. And in the process of going through all the funeral arrangements and the details, and of course as being the pastor in the group, I was the one who did the funeral. And so in some ways I had to disconnect myself from the emotions and the feelings of that to try and just get through what had to be done for this funeral. Had to put my emotions and my feelings kind of on the back burner for a while. But I remember specifically after the funeral was over, at the graveside, after things were kind of all really wrapped up, just being one of the last ones there and just having an opportunity to just be by myself for a minute or two and just putting my hand on the casket. I don't know why, but there was something about being able to touch that connected me somehow and enabled me to remember and to say goodbye. Touch can be a powerful memory maker. And that's why we have monuments and those sorts of things. You know, the Vietnam Memorial, the Wailing Wall, all kinds of things that we can go to and touch and be connected with. All this reminds me of a story from the Bible that we typically look at around Easter time. Jesus had been tried, he had been convicted, he had been hung on the cross and crucified and died. He told his followers all this would happen, but he also told them that he would return to life 3 days later. But in their grief at this time, all these things, they'd forgotten these things. They'd forgotten what he'd said, forgotten his promise. And so when the women go to the tomb, he'd been temporarily buried in a tomb until they could do it properly. When they finally went back to be able to do that burial properly, they were surprised and upset at what they found. The stone was rolled away from the grave, the tomb that was there, and two men in dazzling clothes that they would later realize were angels were sitting on top of it and told them that Jesus wasn't here, that he was alive, that he had done what he promised, that he returned to life again, just like he had said. And so they run back to the disciples and they tell all Jesus' followers what they had seen and heard and all they had experienced, and most of those disciples didn't believe them, thought they had just gotten overcome with their grief and something else was going on there. But two of them, John and Peter, they get into a foot race to the tomb to see for themselves. And they realize when they get there that there is no body. Just there in that grave are the grave clothes that Jesus was buried in, that he was wrapped up in. Then sometime later, all of Jesus' followers were in a house. They were afraid of the religious leaders at the time, so they were in a locked house. They were hiding out. And suddenly, Jesus appears in the middle of this house. Locked house. Doors are locked shut, and suddenly Jesus is right there. And they were overjoyed that Jesus was alive. They were overjoyed that what they had heard was actually true. But there was one disciple that wasn't there. His name was Thomas. Later on, they told the story to Thomas, and Thomas didn't believe it. It was too much for him. Too much for him to get his mind wrapped around. He was maybe the skeptic of the group. He needed to see it for himself. And we see Thomas saying in that context that unless I see his hands and the print of his nails, unless I put my finger in the place where the nails were, I won't believe it. And I sometimes wonder how the rest of those disciples reacted to Thomas. Whether they were skeptical of him, whether they were, he got the name Doubting Thomas after all, so he got a bit of a bad rap because of that. But if they questioned where his faith was. But I wonder if some of them got it too, that they had been there themselves. It's certainly common in our day and age where we live. We like to see evidence, we like to see proof of things, especially in this age of fake news. We hear so much, and what's true, what's not true. We want to see evidence, we want to have proof. But more important than how the disciples reacted to Thomas is how Jesus responded to him. And in that passage in John 20, we see a few verses later that about a week's time had passed, and all of the followers were again in this house. They were again hidden away. They were locked in a house. And Jesus again appears right in the middle of them. But this time, he goes straight to Thomas. And he says, here, put your finger here where the nail was. And here, put your hand in the side where the spear went through and see for yourself. And he says, stop doubting and believe. And we see Thomas's only response to that is, my Lord and my God. He believed because that touch connected him to what was real. As we take time this morning to reflect on those who have passed on from this life ahead of us, touch, I think, can also encourage us. It can heal us. It can connect us to those loved ones, but it can also connect us to God, encourage our faith. This story reminds me that God is an approachable God. That God wants us to come to him, and God understands our weaknesses. He understands our need for connection. He understands our tendency to doubt sometimes, our tendency to forget. And if we reach out to him and we reach out to touch him, he reaches out to touch us where we need his touch, so that we can be encouraged and healed and strengthened in our faith. God is a God who understands who we are. He understands our needs. He understands that we're weak and that we get hurt, and that we're in need of healing, we're in need of encouragement. The story of Jesus healing Lazarus reminds me of the same thing. When Jesus is there and hears that his friend Lazarus is dying, he continues on his way. He doesn't immediately drop what he's doing and hurry along to Lazarus. He waits for a little bit, and then by the time he finally gets to Lazarus, he's already passed away. And there's a lot of mourning already happening. There's a lot of pain that's already there at this loss, especially from Lazarus' two sisters, Mary and Martha. And Jesus gets to that grave, and we see there the shortest verse in the Bible, that Jesus wept. And that's a powerful verse, because as we keep reading, and if you are familiar with the story already, you know that in a few moments he's going to heal Lazarus. He's going to raise Lazarus from the dead. That this is not going to be a bad news story. This is going to be a good news story. And yet Jesus, in that moment, he wept. And I think, again, that shows us that Jesus understands our weakness. He understands our pain at the loss of loved ones. He understands our need. And he meets us in those places. God is a God who understands us. God gets us. He's a God who invites us to reach out and touch him. And in turn, he reaches out and touches us where we need him. He invites us to bring our doubt. He invites us to bring our hurt and to receive the healing that only he can bring. And so as we go into the rest of this service of coming and lighting candles and remembering those who have gone on ahead of us, it's an opportunity for us to not only remember the people and be thankful for their lives, for the impact they've had on us, that how they have touched our lives. It's an opportunity for us also to come to God, to reach out to him, to touch him, to invite him to touch us in our place of healing, or of need of healing, our places of hurt, and to receive from him. The invitation is an invitation to touch and remember. Remember with thankfulness those who have impacted us, but who have gone on ahead of us. But an invitation as well to reach out to God, to touch and be touched by God, for strength and for hope and for healing and for faith.